Lalla's interest. Let's talk about a story featuring power and children. Ooh.
These children were so manipulative and conniving, and I loved every second of it. And I was so excited they pulled one over on their parents. So good.
This is one of those stories where I hear all the time how people compare Russian literature with Dickens. And, Dickens had a big influence on some of the earlier 19th century Russian writers, particularly. And I'm always like, yeah, whatever. But I don't know, maybe it's because of the children, the poverty. This one, I'm starting to see okay, yes, I do see some of the themes and the argument of where power comes from and where class as a weapon is used. I'm starting to see more of the influence Dickens may have had that a lot of these critics are arguing.
Were you waiting for the point where one of the kids was going to be like, "A kopeck, sir," and hold out their hands?
In this story, we open up on an 11-year-old car operator, I think is what they called him. Good old Yakov. He has his instructions of buttons of who to bring up and who to bring down, and he becomes friends with 6-year-old Lalla. Right, this is the beginning of our story. Is these two children, and I guess the perspective of the story is. We look at these children and we kind of downplay their power. We downplay what they have control of. They're just children, right? They don't know better. They can't make decisions yet, is the feeling you get at the beginning of this story, right?
Yeah, the mom, it's her perspective of that Yakov is lesser than because he's this car operator and that her and her daughter are better than him. And it really is kind of her perspective that she's more important because she's an adult, and she kind of lords that over the children, and the children know that too.
Well, she tries to stop them too, right? Going to the landlord, there's going to be a meeting of children. You got to bring licorice if you're not a member of this building.
Yeah, I like how the kids finally decide that they want to take some power for themselves. And you don't know who organizes the meeting at the beginning of the story, but there's going to be this secret meeting for just children. And it is hilarious that in order to get into the meeting, you have to bring licorice. And that drives the price of licorice up. A little bit of, economics in there as well. I loved it.
Well, and the mother goes, the daughter slams the door. Mother finds her daughter's gone, runs to the boys. He's gone too. So she goes down the elevator and bloop, gets stuck by the elevator operator, right? Let's trap the adults so they can't stop the meeting. The children have the meeting.
Yeah. So they all come together and now they're collaborating. And it's interesting because it unfolds just how you think it would unfold with kids. Complete chaos in the beginning where all the kids are just kind of yelling out their complaints of why they're upset at their parents, which I think is pretty standard of most of us can probably kind of relate to that as a child, you see a lot of faults in the things you feel like your parents are doing unjustly to you.
Do you think that the mother wasn't listening to Lalla? Do you think that because it was a child, her interests are lesser than her own?
From the mother's perspective, no, but from Lalla's perspective, yes. And I think that's important to note of whose perspective you're looking at. Me, I guess my inner child kind of agrees with the children a little bit here that sometimes parents see the bigger picture and the children see just their own internal suffering.
Do you know when this story was written?
I don't remember.
1925.
Oh, okay. So we're right in the roaring 20s, and life is pretty good for the upper class of most of the world.
Yeah, but not in Russia.
No, not in Russia.
We have the 1917 revolution. We have communism is kind of in swing here. Do you know what the workers, what is it? Workers' Party, Workers' Union? There's workers' councils. That's what it is. Workers' councils. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, so I feel like that there's a good vibe here that the children are representing kind of the unionization, and that the children are the ones that are saying maybe the people should be making the choices and not the politicians. I felt like the story overall was kind of anti-communist and a little bit pro-capitalism, of that maybe the people should be given more power and the government should not be lording over them, i.e. that the parents are the government and the kids are, the rising up of, almost like a democratic society.
I think when we look at how, this is a newer, mean, the idea has been around forever, but in terms of actual execution, it's a newer thing for the world to see. And these workers' councils were a way of putting power at the lowest level. Like, it's kind of a weird, we only know power at the top growing up in the West, right? Even your comments right there sound very power at the top, the way you describe that. But workers' councils were kind of like that attempt to flip it, where the power was at the lowest levels and they could vote. And it was representative, right? There were ambassadors, I think, that were given the power and then voted for what the people wanted. But in theory, it was a more consistent way of putting power at the lowest levels, I would say.
I would agree with that. And I think that, isn't it kind of ironic that when you talk about power being at the top and the bottom, what is one of the main components of the story? The parents who have the power are stuck in an elevator, power at the top and the bottom, and the kids are in the bottom of the building.
I love that.
A lot of good symbolism here in this story. Very, very well crafted.
This is obviously, I think, to me, I should say, is more of like an allegory, like we said, for the workers' councils, where the workers could, even if they didn't like how they were being represented, they could vote out the upper levels. Like in the West, we can't do that. You don't like your CEO. Well, I guess
You're
there's
stuck
boards.
with him.
I guess there's boards, but if you got a company of 50,000 people, that one person at the bottom, he ain't got the power to vote out, right? But isn't that kind of it? Like, imagine if you didn't like what your parents were doing and you're just like, hey, yeah, the three of us got together. We're going to outvote you. You're out, pops. Like
and that's what's hilarious about like the end of the story. And you get the little letter saying like, basically, I shouldn't have chosen you, Mom, or I'm going to pick different next time. And it's like, oh, that's kind of a gut punch where you realize a lot of times from a child's perspective, what is important to them of what they would pick for their parents. Now, do they know best? Maybe not. And I think that's a good argument. The story is when you think about, this power struggle between parents and children or government and people, do the people really know what's best for them, or do governments? And I think that's what it really comes down to. The heart of the story is who should be making the decisions. And I don't know the answer, and I don't know if there is a right answer. I don't think as a society, any society has ever come up with the right answer. And I think that's what's being kind of questioned here is how can we do this better to make life better for everybody?
Yeah, I wish I was smart enough to know the answer there. I couldn't help but wonder, how like when in the United States you have a certain period of time when your representatives are allowed to take the floor and speak, right? And sometimes they just like use up their time and like literally will just read the dictionary just to kill time. They call it filibustering, right? I wonder, was there a similar thing with like workers' councils with how they like trap the parents? Like, was there a filibustering there of keeping the quote unquote parent, locked up for a certain period of time? Like, I wonder if there is a parallel there or not, was one of the things that I was kind of wondering.
Oh, that's a good question. I imagine you could see it that way. I think that the kids, obviously it isn't as complicated as full-blown governments and filibustering and everything. They were on a set timetable. I did how they organized how they were going to air their grievances out. Very interesting. Yeah.
Have you ever thought in terms of this author? So it came out in 1925. So it's got to go through, I don't know if censorship or if the authorities is the right word, but it had to go through another set of hands before it'd be published, right? And there could be, a hard stop based on what the author is saying. Do you think that this book is neutral enough on, I say book, but the story is neutral enough on how unions organize and where power is because of that? Or do you think that there was clearly perhaps a preference from the author?
For me, I thought it was clear as day that the author had a preference to the fact of being a little bit more pro-union or pro-choice for people in their destinies and maybe taking some power away from the government. But I think that's because we know what to look for. I think that if you were reading this in 1925, 1926 in Russia, or maybe anywhere in the world for that matter, I think that it's subtle enough. I think that it glosses around the issues that it doesn't overtly hit you in the face to say, this is what I think. It just makes you think of, maybe people should have some more choices if they're being told what to do from an unfair standpoint.
All right, Lalla's Interest by Vera Inber, published in our Russian short stories. We'll leave a link down below. Let us know what your interpretation was of the story, and did you think that Vera had a specific angle that she was going for with this one? My name's been Una. Thank you for spending time with us today. Peace.
Crypto out.